Bob, would you mind sharing your screen and we will get into the meat of our meeting tonight?
I'll do that. I'm going to share my screen, and Danny, I think I've got the right file. If I don't, I'll make sure that I get it.
I think you do. You're in the right PowerPoint.
All right. You can see my screen.
Yep. Thank you, Bob. So yeah, here's our agenda tonight. We just did our introductions. So next up, we're just going to go into our campaign review and talking about our work in February. Have some time for questions, and then Rich will give his presentation, and then we'll have some time for questions after that, and then we'll just wrap up hopefully around 8 tonight. So you can go to the next slide, Bob. So our strategic goal for our campaign, we referred to Final Five voting a couple of times here tonight. So what our strategic goal is to build relationships, promote civic engagement, and organize residents to demand that legislators pass Final Five voting in the Wisconsin legislature in order to reduce extreme partisanship and divisiveness in politics. So for the uninitiated, Final Five voting is a combination of an open nonpartisan primary and an instant runoff general election. Bob is going to talk about some of the benefits of that later in our presentation tonight. But from just a high point of view, that's what it is. So it is that combination of an open nonpartisan primary and instant runoff general election. And yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more tonight too. So you can go to the next slide, Bob. So here's our geographic scope. So our project is mainly focused on Assembly Districts 28, 29, 30, and 93. So 4 Assembly Districts here in Western Wisconsin. And it includes all or parts of the counties of Pierce, St. Croix, Dunn, Polk, Eau Claire, and Pepin. So those are our main counties that we operate in. Every once in a while, we find ourselves getting a little bit further out into Eau Claire, or a little further south or north sometimes as well. But those are the main ones that we operate in. So then we can go on to our campaign timeline. So we kicked this off last June with a couple events in Menominee and River Falls. And since then, we've really been focused on house parties and community events as a way to spread the word about Final Five voting and get more people aware of it, really do some education on what Final Five voting is. So we really point people towards house parties as our best way to really educate people. And then we hit a lot of people at community events too, but often those conversations might be a little shorter since people are usually have a less attention span or less time in that sort of situation, but we hit a lot of people there too. And those are really the main things that we're doing right now. And we've really, in the last month or so, in the last few months even, ever since the Alaska special election last August, and then the general election in November, in which a Democrat won in a Final Four voting technically, but the same thing, election, that has posed some challenges in terms of getting more Republicans on board with Final Five voting. And you could think of it sort of in the inverse too, that if Alaska was a Democrat-controlled state for 50 years, and then a Republican won when they instituted Final Five voting, that people might get a little skeptical. So really, at this point in time, we're trying to make sure that we're making inroads and getting relationships with trusted messengers. So people who are either donors of Republican legislators, close friends of Republican legislators, who are a little more likely to be able to convince those Republican legislators when push comes to shove that Final Five voting is the path forward. So saying that, we know that nothing happens in Wisconsin's state legislature unless it has Republican support, since it is a Republican controlled state legislature. So that's, we have to be able to bridge the divide and live up to our name. We have both Republicans and Democrats to support this, and independents, and really we're focused on that conservative outreach as best as we can right now. So Bob, you can take us to our next slide, and I believe you take it here to talk about our house party updates.
Thank you, Danny. This is the exact same slide that you've seen in the past. These are the benefits, and you've heard me say before, if you remember one thing about Final Five voting, about our campaign, I don't want you to worry about the mechanics of the voting and the tabulating. That's not the key. The benefits are the key. And every benefit listed on here is real. I want you to pick the one that resonates the most with you, the one that makes the most emotional impact with you, and remember that. And that's how I want you to lead off. That's why I've said reduces toxic campaigns is often the one that people gravitate toward most. Our host party team is focused on growing the number of people that are aware of this, willing to work for us, and even carry our message forward. We had 4 parties in February. We've made more inroads with Rotary clubs. We still have not spoken to a Chamber of Commerce, but we really want your help to get us in front of more groups. Danny mentioned the Republican outreach. I think we've got a picture here. Yep. So I'll leave it for the community events, but we did show up at a gun show. We rented a booth at a gun show, and I bet Danny will talk more about that. Our effort is to engage with more Republicans, just because without even trying, we find ourselves speaking to many more Democrats. I will say, I feel like I'm a little bit worried that our house party traction is slowing. We're finding it a little bit more difficult to get new house party hosts each time we talk to a house party. So again, any way you can help us get our message in front of more people, we need people to help schedule us. We will take care of everything else. I want to hit on again, looking at benefits. So this month's frequently asked question, how does Final Five voting make politicians accountable to more voters? In a way, the key thing is to think of how it happens today and realize how shockingly few voters are required to decide an election today. And I'm thinking of those districts that never change parties. And there are huge numbers of districts, 80% of the districts that never change parties. And for those districts, those low turnout primaries with 15% of eligible voters is all that's necessary to decide who represents that district. Even if you ignored all of Final Five voting's other benefits, at the very least, you'd know that elections decided in November, that is general elections, with 65% of eligible voters, those would be the elections that decide who are our representatives. So that's how, by making these politicians accountable to 65% of eligible voters rather than 15%, that's how we make politicians accountable to more voters. And Danny, I think that's all I have from the House Party team.
Yep. Yeah. And I'll just comment on that last point you made here as well, which really is one of the most important aspects of Final Five voting. The reason for that is because in that primary election, you'll have the top 5 vote getters advance to the general election. So on that general election ballot, you might have 2 or 3 Republicans in a red district, or you might have 2 or 3 Democrats in a blue district. And that ensures that that November general election is the one that's really more important, because that's when the vast majority of voters are showing up. So yeah, thank you for that, Bob. And can you bring us to, community events? Thank you. So yeah, like Bob said, this last month, in case you wanted any proof that we were taking our conservative outreach very seriously, we had a booth at a gun show in Eau Claire. And Bob and I were there along with Josh from Veterans for Political Innovation and Reese, who is a student who volunteers for us every once in a while. And every conversation we had there was a productive one. You know, there were certainly some skeptical people at first, but by the end, even if we hadn't quite convinced them that Final Five voting was the answer, they at least understood our intentions were good, and they understood where we were coming from. So I would say that, yeah, in an environment like that, like it is about, and really any environment, whenever you're talking to someone and at any sort of conference or community event, you really want to find out what matters to someone and see if you could sort of tie it to what matters to us and Final Five voting, how we think that that could impact things for the better. So it's really about, yeah, having conversations with people in the amount of time that you have and getting to know them and seeing what you can do. And if you can learn more about them, they'll often reciprocate that and want to learn more about what you're talking about. So yeah, and then upcoming this month in just about a week, yeah, exactly a week, we'll be at the Red Cedar Watershed Conference, and that is from 8 to 4:30. That is in Menominee, and we're looking for people to attend that conference with us. So if you're interested in coming for an hour or two to our booth in Menominee at the Red Cedar Watershed Conference, we'll have a form at the end of the meeting that you can fill out. And yeah, we're looking for however much help we could get there. So it's always appreciated. And then down here, it also says we're always looking for more community events. And we certainly are. So we're hoping to have a couple where we have a couple also scheduled April. And then, yeah, we're hoping in the summer when county fairs heat up and things like that start going again, more outdoor events, we can be in those sort of environments as well. So yeah, Bob, you could take us to our letter writing team slide. So last month we launched a letter writing team with Bridge Divide to promote Final Five voting in our local newspapers. So far, we've got about 10 letters published. Alex provided us our first template that we mass published across Western Wisconsin, which was, yeah, that's been very well received. And yeah, it got published in about 10 newspapers. And then we're always looking for more submitters and writers, particularly in Menominee right now. We could use someone to submit for us. My understanding that Menominee doesn't have the most active newspaper either right now. I believe they just rely on Dunn County News, if I'm not mistaken, but we are looking for someone in Menominee if we could find one. That'll be in our form at the end of the meeting as well. And then our last slide in our update is the next slide, the statewide meetup slide. So about 6 months ago in September, we had a statewide meetup with that Rich from Voters First put together with his organization, with all the different organizations attending across the state that are working on Final Five voting. So we have multiple partners in this fight, in this project, and we'll have another statewide meetup coming up in April. Right now, the date is tentatively April 15th, and it'll be somewhere around there, April, May time span. And if you are interested in coming, that will also be in the form at the end of the meeting. And you can let us know and we'll make sure that you get the information when the date is set. And for that, carpooling will also be available. So if that's a barrier for you, we'll try to remove that barrier as best as we can. So yeah, that is all for our presentation, but I do want to give ourselves some time for any questions. If anyone has any questions about anything that I've covered, be it the statewide meetup or letter writing team, anything like that, any updates we've given about our work in the last month. So yeah, any questions for the time being? Okay, if there are no questions, and if a question comes to mind, you can always put it in chat too, and I can answer it down there. But if there are no questions for now, I'm going to hand it off to Rich, and Rich is here to talk about not only his work with Voters First, but mainly his red, white, and blue discussions. So this is work that Rich does separate from his Final Five voting work, but it's another way to bridge the divide, pull people from both the left and the right together in order to reduce partisanship. And our mission with Bridge the Divide is ultimately to reduce partisanship and divisiveness. So hearing about how Rich does this outside of Final Five voting will be very useful for us tonight, and it'll be great to hear about. So take it away, Rich.
Sounds good. Thanks, Danny. And Danny, if you could just monitor the chat if people have questions or just shout it out, I can hear you as well. We're a very cozy group here. So yes, I know many of you because of our work together with Final Five, but we're also committed, like you, to bridge the divide. And so Lena and I have another nonprofit that we're a part of that looks at how we can do that. And we do that through red, white, and blue dialogues. Now, one thing that we just want to kind of set the stage here is we think in this desire to bring the country together again, we really need three elements. We need to change people's individual hearts, right? Soften them so that we're not enemies to each other. We believe that many of the people today are not necessarily bad per se, but they're just deceived by a media that believes in alternative facts. And if we can help get the right incentives in media and help people become more literate to what is generally reliable media versus that which isn't, that will help a lot too. And then, the third pillar of change is innovating on the political systems and structures, which, you all know we're working together on Final Five voting, and that can be the catalyst for many of the other events we care about, like gerrymandering, money in politics, and things of that nature. But, that's the work of Voters First. I want to share with you today a little bit about the work of another organization called The Light. And The Light is, this organization that's focused on changing hearts. And really, we've got a few initiatives that we pursue. One is the red, white, and blue dialogues, which I'll talk about in a minute. The second one is really want to have missional relationships with Christian nationalists. So approaching things from the standpoint of a missionary, right? Building a relationship, gaining trust, and then helping them to maybe broaden their perspective a bit from what they have. We want to help pastors and church leadership put piety over power. There's been a little bit of I think, a trade-off there in the wrong direction that we want to help right that ship. And then we want to bring peace to the culture wars. We believe that many Americans are fighting today things that really don't need to be fighting about, or at least can be discussed in a much more civil fashion. And so, that's our work here. And The Light is a religious nonprofit. Just to be clear, Lena and I are, many of you know we are conservatives. We're from the right. We are evangelical Christians, and this one has a unique flavor in that tribe. All right, so with respect to red, white, and blue dialogues, I want to share with you 5 things today, kind of what they are, why we started them, who participates in these, and then spend most of the time on how the inner workings of red, white, and blue dialogues, and then share some lessons that we've learned that we might try to modify and utilize as we go to improve the next experience here. Okay, so what are red, white, and blue dialogues? Well, number one, they are a learning experience that we're really trying to design to help dispel fear, instill hope, and radiate love within our community. Okay, it's something that we want people to experience. We believe more is caught than taught, and so this is our way to do that. Number 2 is these red, white, and blue dialogues are also an experiment to show people that are ideologically diverse that you really can work together and come together to solve things. Okay, we have this phrase: if you use common sense to find common ground, we can help solve our common problems together. And that is the experiment we try in red, white, and blue dialogues. And then the third element of what red, white, and blue dialogues are is, hey, we want to set an example. We want to show our legislators that, look, if their constituents are able to work together to solve problems, then they should too. All right, so what are red, white, and blue dialogues? Well, to give you a high-level picture, they are a series of 4 to 5 week sessions that we focus on, the hot topics of our day. You can kind of see some of the topics that we've covered in the past to the right there in a little word cloud. Our first session, though, is always on media literacy, even though that's not the other organization that works on media. We believe that you really can't have common ground until you have a common set of facts. We share with people the best ways to know what credible sources are, how to distinguish between fact versus opinion, or news versus opinion, and factuality and reliability versus bias. So that's always a good discussion. And then the other 4 sessions would be on, say, some of these topics or more. Usually lasts about 2 hours. We host them in a comfortable environment, which has been our house, typically our garage. There's a large group portion of the meeting and then a small group, but people tend to sit in tables of 6 to 10. And within those 6 to 10, we usually have 1 to 2 facilitators that work with us from the beginning to make the red, white, and blue dialogues work. The number of tables can be scalable. You can have 1 table and host a small group. You could have 100. That they're all scalable as long as you have facilitators there. One thing we do emphasize is that this is not meant to be a debate. This is also not a place where people get on their soapbox, but also it's more than just listening to each other. We wanted to go beyond that, and we wanted to actually show people that they could solve problems together. So that was the expectation, that you're actually going to do something beyond even just listening. The kind of impetus for starting this is we were very impressed with the work 2 other groups had done. Perhaps some of you have heard of the organization Braver Angels. They do some excellent work, similar to your guys' mission. They want to bring people together, not drive them apart. Ditto for the Millennial Action Project. We were very impressed with this group of young people that were committed to try to find a spirit of bipartisanship and cross-partisanship within our legislative branches. And so, taking what they had done, we just built on top of that. And one of the things we were building on top of that is Braver Angels and Millennium Action Project would pull people together, and they would just practice the active listening, the listening skills, understanding empathy and hearing what each other was about. We wanted to go beyond listening. Like I mentioned before, we want to go to problem solving. And as we were thinking about, how do we go change people's hearts, back to the element or theory of change number A there, we didn't just want to be another loud voice and just publish content and do this and that. We actually wanted to find a way to make this experiential. And because we are a religious nonprofit, we were concerned, and we also wanted to portray evangelicals in a way that we felt was truer to Jesus and his teachings. It was very different than the way we're being portrayed in the media today. So if you kind of do a Google search on evangelical and you look at the first page of the 10 images that come up, this is what you see when you Google evangelical. And I would venture to you that not all evangelicals are like this, right? Perhaps some in the evangelical tribe, so to speak, have been maybe tied to one party more than they should be. But we believe a better representation of what evangelicals and what the Christian faith is about would be represented by some of these qualities. And these qualities are not typically the ones that have been portrayed in the media per se. We usually are portrayed as angry, fearful, anxious, and we said, hey, that's not true for all of us. Let's see if we can show another facet of what evangelicals are like. All right, so we've talked about the what. Let's talk about the who. So participation is by invitation only. And just one thing to let you know is everything is live. We do nothing on social media, nothing on Zoom, nothing on the internet, because we're really trying to, one of our other hypotheses is that a lot of the toxicness that's in the US today is a result of media and social media in particular, where people have forgotten what it's like to connect face to face. People say things on social media that they really would be very hesitant to say live. So that's why we do everything live here. what we do is we reach out to different groups that we know. There's many progressive organizations that we work with and work with Voters First. We have relationships with many different churches. That's where we draw out people from the right. And we specifically try to invite people so that we have a good mix of ideologies coming into these red, white, and blue dialogues. The key thing is no one but me and Lena know where everybody sits, roughly in terms of their ideology. And although usually by the end of it, people know where everybody stands, but it's good that we don't start out by judging people, just by a label they might happen to wear. We're much more nuanced. We're much more complex than just a single label can describe us, and we want people to kind of learn and discover that themselves. And finally, the people that we invite, they have to agree that on a few things. We ask them to say, hey, are you committed to finding solutions? Because that's really where we want to get to, is finding solutions. We don't want people there just to monologue and talk about what they believe. They need to be willing to be creative and flexible in crafting those solutions, with other people who might have slightly different approaches to things. And really the big thing that we ask people to do is, you got to do this. This is the ABCs of political discourse, is you always be courteous. If people can't sign up for that, we're kind of like, this is probably not the best place for you. So a little bit of self-selection there, but these are the people that we feel can contribute to making a great experience in our red, white, and blue dialogues. All right, so how do we structure that 2 and 2.5 hours? Well, typically the first 45 minutes, we start by having a meal together, whether it be lunch or a dinner. Typically it's a potluck, people come there. And it just, many of you who might be in business or have families, you know that eating a meal just tends to bring the guard down. Being able to sit together and enjoy each other's company is, over some good food is always something that, brings the tension down. Then after that, we have a icebreaker, and it be a deliberate icebreaker. I'll show an example in a minute here, but it's designed to not just get to know each other, but to show that we have many things in common, beyond politics, beyond our ideology. These are very, I think, deliberate icebreakers to use for that purpose. Then the next 15, 20 minutes, we have a speaker or a video come and introduce the topic of that day. You saw the different things we talked about, whether it be vaccines and masks or Black Lives Matter, CRT, whatever. Somebody comes and paints a broad picture of what happens, but they go into a good detail too, with information that most people don't know about, in order to present a fair and comprehensive view, to show the nuance and to show the littler things that make things gray on the topic, as opposed to a stark black and white. So people have to realize we have too many false binaries in our society, and to see that, hey, we can all be at different levels here. It's good to understand what's behind those different levels of a topic. And then the big thing that we really like is, after the speaker gives the overview, everybody breaks up into their individual table group, and they are asked to work on a very carefully worded problem statement, and that pertains to the topic. So we give them time to do that. They have to come up with a solution. Failure is not an option. They got to come up with something, because in 15 minutes, they are reporting out to the rest of the tables what they came up with in their team. And it's always interesting to see whether we have common solutions, or sometimes some table comes up with a novel solution that none of the other tables come up with. And it's great to see the team are free to come up with ideas and generate solutions, as opposed to focusing on arguing against each other. And then we, close out, share some things that we learned at the time, and then adjourn or just hang out. Some people hang out for a while afterwards. It's good with that bonding and relationship building experience, particularly for people who maybe some have never hung out with each other before. It is kind of funny that, there are a few people that said, oh, wow, Rich, you're like the nicest evangelical I've ever met. And I kind of laugh at that sometimes. I'm like, okay, maybe I'm the only one you've ever met, but in that regard. And then, some people say that to somebody else on the left. I've never met a Democrat who was actually nice. I thought you guys always thought we're racist and haters. So it's neat to see those type of comments come out when the stereotypes come down and actual human listening and empathy, rises, because we're connecting belly to belly. And here's an example of a simple icebreaker that we've used in the past. It's never fails that people can come up with 10 things that they have in common with each other. It's fun to do, and everybody resonates around something like this. Here's an example where we talked about, I think this topic was on equality of outcomes. And we were trying to explain, particularly to level set everybody, because at the time people were saying, oh, I think CRT is everybody, the people on the right were saying that everybody wants the same outcomes, and people on the left were saying, no, it's about equity and inclusion. So we had to explain this to people and say, well, you can kind of be both right? I mean, if you're looking at equality of nutrition, all four of these people, you just give them the same number of calories. Is that really what they need in order to grow? No, it's a little bit more complex than that, a little bit more, as we said earlier, nuanced. But the outcome we want is we want everybody to flourish in their situation, right? So a slide like this was helpful as the speaker shared that and explained to people, again, at a deeper level, things that go beyond 3 letters of something called CRT, right? Another example that was helpful where we did a session on gun violence. And even though people on the right that were attending, they were very much pro Second Amendment, they were kind of shocked to learn that, hey, over 80% of shooters take guns from family members. Hey, we're not asking you to give up the Second Amendment, but what do you think? Does it make sense that we could do some education to help people secure the weapons in their homes more securely, so that young people don't take them and commit violence in our schools? That's been an epidemic across our country, right? So that was an eye-opening example. I'll skip this one. Here, this one, a lesson to those on the left who joined us. A lot of people on the left who joined us for a section on pro-life, pro-choice, they thought that only religious people cared about being pro-life. And so a speaker shared, hey, there's actually lots of, secular groups, non-religious groups that care about the pro-life cause. And that was eye-opening to people as well. This one was for the right, to explain to them that Planned Parenthood is not the monster that they think it is. So people were, and on both sides, were challenged with their beliefs, and with a credible evidence and sources cited, that they could think twice about maybe some preconceived notions that they had that needed to be challenged. And then, again, this was from our abortion time. So we were looking at different methods of birth control in this case. And when people saw this statistics about the efficacy of IUDs, for example, in both typical use and perfect use, that led them to find common ground on, hey, maybe we could work together. We don't agree on the value of abortion, right? Those on the right think it's killing a baby. Those on the left think you're denying women health care. But they were able to come together at our table groups and say, hey, look, we can work together on, say, reducing unplanned pregnancies, if you see what I have in part 2 up here. And so they would work together on that. And it was amazing to see that all the groups that participated were able to get, somewhere. They didn't fully get all the way across and everything. Like, I know the group that was on this side, they didn't get to finish here because they were debating many of these things, which is good. We want to debate. But the fact that they could make progress in solving these things was really incredible to everybody. And that was the big takeaway that we walked away with. Some things that helped us in our discussion, just little things like having name tags printed on both sides. We had handouts with detailed notes because there were a lot of material that the speakers would introduce. Again, having food in a comfortable environment. Music made it well. Can't emphasize the importance of having good facilitators. I saw Susan, one of our facilitators, was on earlier. I don't know if she stayed, but just having people who are trained in helping people to not fight, but to shed light and not heat on topics was very, very helpful. A couple pictures from some of the meetings that we had. And just, overall, big thing as we take away from this is every single table group that we've ever seen, they've always been make some sort of progress in finding a solution together. And that has been really motivating to the folks who've attended, because some of them, they only hang out in their own tribe. They don't really, if they're on the left, they don't know too many other people on the right that they're close with, and vice versa. So being put in a situation where they're able to do that, to see people as humans, and to actually achieve something together was very, I think, emotionally fulfilling for them. In fact, some of them wanted to go further and said, hey, we should take our results and talk to our legislator about this. And we're like, oh, okay, hey, I'm not stopping you, but that's great. Yeah, so it's neat to see kind of the progression. In the beginning, we saw this kind of red team versus blue team. But over time, it just became the red team and the blue team. Maybe this, when you see people doing this, it could be a sign of a struggle, or it could be a sign of a great handshake, right? It all depends on the perspective that you take. And I think that was one thing that people learned, is appreciating other perspectives, but still being committed to work together to solve our joint problems and our hard problems of today's society. So really, in closing, some of the lessons that we learned is, hey, this can be very emotional for some of us. During one of our talks on school shootings, we had somebody who was there in Columbine. It was hard, okay? And I mean, literally, person had to walk out because it was so emotional. So we got to be prepared for that. It takes a lot of work to make sure that you fully have a good balanced perspective on these difficult topics, right? Because even though you may violently disagree with the person, there's usually some truths that are important that you need to understand that you're not considering from their perspective. Mixing people up ideologically. So Lena and I were very careful on the seating arrangement to make sure that people didn't all sit with their tribe. One thing we did find, it was harder to get conservatives to attend. We had to work at it, but it seemed that something that people on the left would gravitate to have these discussions. People on the right maybe a little bit more guarded, but we were able to eventually get them there. And then one thing afterwards that ties to our work with Voters First is, after we'd finish a 4-week, 5-week series, we tell them about Voters First and say, look, we believe in changing the hearts, but we also believe that we have to change systems. And if you're interested in that, come join with us on Final Five Voting and we can have a conversation. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. Danny, if there's any questions, I'm happy to discuss with people.
Yes, thank you, Rich. Yeah, any questions come to mind for people?
Not a question, but Rich, that was inspiring. So fantastic. Nice job.
Oh, thanks, Bob. It's been great experience for everybody.
Yeah, one question I have, you said these are 4 to 5 week sessions. Do you have like one a week, 1 2-hour conversation a week, or how many, I guess, individual sessions do you have?
Some series were like once a week. Others were kind of dependent on me and Lena's schedule. So those spaced out over 2 months. They were like every other week. But it all depends on whoever's hosting it. But we did try to keep them no more than 2 months spaced total time.
Yeah, sounds good. And then, you said you take from Braver Angels a lot for inspiration. Do you try like Braver Angels does to have an equal amount of liberals and conservatives in the room?
Yeah, we definitely try to keep it balanced because you don't want people to feel ganged up. We want everybody to feel like they have a voice, but we didn't want people to get comfortable in their quote unquote tribe either. And so we would deliberately space them apart.
Yeah, for sure. Bob, do you have a question?
Rich, you said you need trained facilitators. Where did you come upon trained facilitators, or how did you train them, or how did that come about?
Yeah, so this was something we've been experimenting with at our church for a couple of years. So we hosted some sessions within our church where people who actually experienced it and liked it, like Susan was on earlier, they could join us in this, in this little experiment. And so because they've been through this, they understood how it works. They were able to work with us as we open this up to the broader public.
So the trained facilitators often meant not a hyper specialized training, but they had been through the process once.
Right, they've been through the process. So we actually led a class at church called Faith and Politics. And we told them that, look, this is not so much a class as we want to be able to reach out to the community and show people that evangelicals aren't these crazy, maybe political idolatrous, if you will, to one particular party. And if you are interested, come work with us and we'll, learn the skills necessary to lead a small group and shed light, not heat, on a topic. And that's how we got the engagement.
Yeah, for sure. And then I guess one comment I have that was gathered from, you breaking out the agenda is that you really do spend a lot of time, like 45 minutes on just breaking bread and then another 10 minutes on an icebreaker. And I think that shows you like the biggest piece of the puzzle to getting people to get along with each other and understand each other is just building a relationship. Is that sort of the thinking there?
Yeah, that you're exactly right, Danny. So just having time for relationship building during the meeting, but also because we asked people to make like a 4 or 5 week commitment, that allowed for relationship building over time. And so we would keep people in the same table group so that they could learn more and more about each other's stories. They'd have the chance to interact differently during the big meal times, but then when we were sitting at our tables, that they're with the same group that's focused on working together.
Yeah, great. And then, yeah, you mentioned that it was a little difficult to get conservatives to those. What sort of, did you employ any tactics, or was it just a little more concerted sort of outreach to people that eventually got you enough conservatives to go to these things?
Yeah, it was just the more concerted outreach, no special tactic, just we had to ask more. I would say probably a 3-to-1 ratio of greater asks on the conservative side than on the progressive side. But again, because Lena and I, we're from that tribe, we know a lot of people in that space, and we just kept asking.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, any other questions come to mind for Rich tonight?
Just a quick one. I was kind of curious, Rich, you actually focused on 4 or 5 different topics then. So they solved problems on different topics. You didn't, each session, you finish one topic like abortion or whatever, and then you move to another topic.
Right. That's correct, Irene. There was one topic each week. And so we, if it was CRT for 1 week, then the week after it might be immigration. The week after that might be, masks and vaccines or whatever. But we would never do more than, I mean, it's hard to get just one of those things, a good treatment in one time.
Have you been in communication with Braver Angels? Are they interested in what you're doing too? Because I'm really struck by where you've taken it from simply listening to problem solving. So I'm just curious if they know about your work.
Yeah, Cameron, so the executive director in Wisconsin, has actually been to she visited our class. We asked her to come speak to it when we were experimenting. They haven't actually been able to come participate themselves in what we've done, but they're always welcome and we're on friendly terms. But yeah, I totally respect what they're trying to do.
And they actually, I think in some of the training, you have to bring someone of a conservative, if you're a liberal, a conservative individual to the training. So that might be another way to recruit. I mean,
yeah, no, that's a great idea. Thanks for suggesting that.
Exciting. Mike, thank you for sharing.
Sure, my pleasure.
Mike, do you have a question?
Yeah, so when are the next events coming up? What do you have planned? How do people get more involved?
Yeah, so the next one will probably be in the summertime. It's kind of dependent on me. I need to finish firefighter school, Mike. So and I'm getting my butt kicked by all these young people. I can't keep up with them. But once we do that, yeah, we'll get another session going in the summer, and we look forward to that. And if people want to get involved, just email me. Again, we can't take everybody. I balance that out, but it's an invitation only. But just let us know your interest, and we'll try to get you on a list.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions that come up for anyone? And I'll be sure to have Rich's email in the follow-up email as well, in case anyone wants to reach out.
All right,
Yeah,
great.
thank you, Rich. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to drop our Google form in chat that I talked about earlier. This has a few questions on it. If you would like to come with us to the Red Cedar Watershed Conference, submit letters for us, host a house party, or talk to an organizer, I believe are the questions on there. And yeah, feel free to fill that out. And there's also a question about the statewide meetup in April of this year. So yeah, feel free to fill out that form, and that will also go out in our follow-up email. And thank you all for joining us tonight.